A time traveler goes back to the past and kills their own grandfather before their parent is born. That single act, simple, brutal, logical, collapses the entire structure of cause and effect. Because if the grandfather dies, the traveler is never born. But if the traveler is never born, they could never have gone back to kill him. The paradox doesn't just violate chronology, it annihilates the very logic that holds reality together. Time travel tempts us with symmetry. If we can move freely through space, why not through time? Physics even seems to allow it. Relativity tells us that time slows near light speed, and Einstein's equations permit curves in space-time where a path loops back onto itself. These are called closed time-like curves, mathematical tunnels through history. Yet the moment we imagine walking through one, reason unravels. A self-causing event means an effect with no origin, a loop without a beginning. The timeline stops being a line. Some argue the paradox is just semantics, that consistency will always self-correct, that any traveler's actions were already part of history. You might try to kill your grandfather and always fail, but this doesn't solve the problem that cages free will inside predestination. You're not changing time, time is changing you. A universe without paradox is one where every decision is already written, including the illusion of choice. The grandfather paradox exposes something deeper than time travel itself. It reveals that causality, the idea that causes produce effects, is not merely a rule of physics, but the architecture of existence. To break it is to pull the thread that holds reality coherent. Because once the past can be rewritten, even the present loses its meaning. Causality is the spine of every physical law. In classical physics, it's absolute. Causes precede effects, and time flows in a single direction, forward. Strike a billiard ball, and the motion that follows can be traced precisely to the force applied. Every consequence has a definite origin, but relativity distorts that certainty. Einstein showed that time is not universal. It stretches and folds depending on how fast you move or how strong gravity becomes. Two observers can disagree not only on how long something lasts, but on the order in which events occur. The arrow of time is no longer straight. This flexibility opens a terrifying possibility. If space-time can bend, could it bend enough to make time loop? Mathematically, yes. Solutions to Einstein's field equations, like those proposed by Kurt Gödel in 1949, describe universes that rotate so violently that time curves back on itself. A traveler moving along such a path could, in theory, return to their own past. These closed time-like curves are not science fiction, they are permitted by general relativity's geometry. Yet their existence forces an impossible question. Can a physical law remain consistent when its timeline feeds into itself? Consider two particles interacting within such a loop. One emits a photon that strikes the other, which in turn emits the same photon backward in time, becoming the cause of its own cause. The equations balance perfectly, but logic collapses. The effect precedes the event that produced it. In a universe like that, prediction becomes meaningless. The past is not fixed, it's recursive. Every point in time could depend on its own future. The grandfather paradox is not just about human ancestry, it's a test of whether physics can survive its own equations. When space-time becomes circular, determinism and chaos merge. The distinction between before and after dissolves. What remains is a universe where events no longer unfold. They coexist in self-contradiction. Quantum mechanics seems at first to offer a loophole in the grandfather paradox, a way for causality to bend without breaking. In the quantum world, events aren't fixed until they're observed. A particle can exist in multiple states at once, a superposition of possibilities. This uncertainty, some physicists argue, could dissolve paradoxes. The traveler both kills and doesn't kill their grandfather, with reality branching into parallel outcomes. No contradiction, just divergence. But that's not a rescue. It's an escape into multiplicity. The quantum description of time is not the smooth river of relativity, but a probabilistic fog. In this fog, causes and effects can blur. Experiments with quantum erasers and delayed choice show that a measurement made now can appear to influence what already happened. The particle seems to retroactively decide its past behavior. This isn't time travel, it's worse. It means the very concept of a past independent of observation may be an illusion. Causality doesn't just weaken, it becomes participatory. Reality waits for us to choose. If quantum physics allowed true backward causation, paradoxes would erupt instantly. Probabilities would loop, outcomes would overwrite themselves. Yet every experiment remains consistent. That consistency suggests the universe forbids contradictions not by preventing time travel, but by ensuring all possibilities coexist without interference. The paradox is avoided not through reason, but through sheer multiplicity. Every path happens, each isolated in its own quantum branch. But that solution comes at a cost. A multiverse without contradiction is a universe without closure. The traveler no longer cancels their own birth. They merely exile themselves to a new strand of reality, one where their origin has already vanished. The paradox doesn't die. It proliferates. Each act of choice spawns a version of causality that no longer connects to the one before. Time, under quantum law, doesn't break the chain of cause and effect. It replicates it infinitely. And in doing so, it hides the paradox behind an infinity of worlds. If quantum mechanics multiplies timelines to escape contradiction, the Novikov self-consistency principle does the opposite. It seals them shut. Proposed by physicist Igor Novikov in the 1980s, it asserts that any event occurring on a closed time-like curve must be self-consistent, meaning that the past cannot be changed, because any attempt to do so was always part of history. The universe in this view is not flexible, but self-correcting. You can visit the past, but you can never rewrite it. Imagine a time traveler trying to kill their grandfather. According to Novikov, something will always intervene. The gun jams, the bullet misses, or fate conspires in 1,000 imperceptible ways to maintain coherence. These are not coincidences. They are the fabric of reality refusing to fracture. The principle transforms paradox into inevitability. You can act freely, but only in ways that preserve the timeline that already includes your actions. Freedom survives, but meaningfully, it's an illusion. Physicists like Kip Thorne explored this through thought experiments involving wormholes, hypothetical bridges through space-time. In these models, particles traveling through such loops never generate paradoxes. Their trajectories adjust automatically to maintain consistency. If one particle is supposed to collide with its younger self, it does so at precisely the angle and energy that make both histories agree. Causality doesn't break. It bends until logic just barely holds. But this principle, elegant as it is, comes with a strange implication. If the universe forbids paradoxes by design, then every decision, including the ones we think we control, was predetermined from the start. Every cause is already its effect. The traveler's journey, the missed bullet, the act of regret, all of it was written before time itself unfolded. The Novikov principle doesn't resolve the grandfather paradox. It fossilizes it. It tells us not that paradox is impossible, but that reality itself is the paradox, a system that maintains coherence only by denying its own freedom. Causality is not just a rule of logic. It is written into the thermodynamics of the universe. Every process that unfolds, from the melting of ice to the collapse of a star, follows a single command: entropy must increase. Entropy measures disorder, the number of ways energy can be arranged while still describing the same system. The second law of thermodynamics declares that in any closed system, entropy never decreases. It is this one-way climb toward disorder that gives time its direction, the arrow that points from past to future. Rewind that arrow, and causality begins to disintegrate. A broken glass reassembles, heat flows into cold, smoke curls back into a match. Each of these reversed processes is physically possible under Newton's equations, but never observed. Why? Because probability itself forbids it. The universe moves from unlikely order toward overwhelming disorder, not by choice, but by arithmetic. To reverse time would mean reversing every microscopic interaction, every quantum fluctuation, every probability gradient that defines existence. It would mean rewriting every cause to make every effect impossible. This thermodynamic arrow is why time travel feels unnatural. To go back is to push entropy downhill, to make the impossible routine. The grandfather paradox becomes not just a logical contradiction, but a statistical one. The traveler's body, the air they breathe, the neurons that fire to form intention, all depend on irreversible processes. Even if physics allowed backward motion, the traveler's own existence would unravel in the attempt. Entropy, then, is the silent guardian of causality. It ensures that history can only accumulate, never repeat. The past is not sacred because it's remembered. It's sacred because it's thermodynamically sealed. And yet, physics whispers that entropy itself is an emergent property, not a fundamental law, but a byproduct of perspective. If that's true, then the arrow of time is not absolute. It's how the universe looks to beings who remember rather than anticipate. What if time's direction isn't carved into the universe, but into our ignorance of it? In physics, information is more fundamental than matter or energy. It describes the specific state of every particle. To lose information is to lose distinction between past and future, cause and effect. Entropy, in this sense, is not disorder at all, but missing knowledge. The arrow of time might arise not because the universe changes, but because we can't access the total information describing it. Nowhere does this become clearer than at the edge of a black hole. When matter falls in, all details about it, its composition, arrangement, history, seem to vanish beyond the event horizon. This apparent loss of information sparked what Stephen Hawking called the black hole information paradox. If the information truly disappears, the laws of quantum mechanics break, because those laws demand that information is never destroyed. The paradox reveals a strange mirror. Just as time travel threatens causality in the macroscopic world, black holes threaten it in the quantum one. Both point to the same flaw, a universe that can't decide whether its past is permanent. Recent theories suggest that information isn't lost inside black holes. It's encoded in subtle distortions at the horizon, like a cosmic hologram. If so, then the future doesn't erase the past. It merely hides it behind layers of perspective. Every moment still exists, preserved as data in the geometry of space-time itself. What we call the flow of time may simply be the way conscious beings experience the gradual unfolding of accessible information. Causality, then, could be epistemic, a property of knowing, not of being. The universe might already contain every event that will ever happen, but from within it, we perceive change as the sequential revelation of what was always there. And if time is born from ignorance, then perhaps paradoxes only appear when we glimpse too much, when knowledge momentarily outruns the limits of causality itself. Physics describes how time behaves, but only consciousness experiences it. Every second we live is filtered through a mind that arranges experience into order: before, now, after. Without that sequence, there is no story, no memory, no identity. A universe could exist with time perfectly frozen, yet from the inside it would feel like nothing at all. Time may not flow through us. We may be the flow through which time becomes visible. Neuroscience hints that our sense of now is an active construction, not a direct perception. The brain gathers signals from millions of neurons firing at different moments and stitches them into a single frame of the present, a temporal illusion roughly half a second wide. That gap is enough to manufacture continuity. The self is not a traveler moving through time. It's the narrative generated by the delay between reality and awareness. What we call the past may be the memory of earlier brain states, and the future the projection of possible next ones. This means the arrow of time might begin not in physics, but in cognition. Entropy increases because perception demands it. We remember order dissolving into chaos, never the reverse. A reversed movie of the world feels wrong precisely because our minds are wired to register cause before effect. The direction of causality could be an emergent property of how intelligence organizes information into meaning. Now return to the grandfather paradox. The traveler who goes back in time is not just confronting the past, they are confronting the mental architecture that makes past possible. If consciousness constructs time, then to move backward through it would require consciousness itself to invert. Memory would become prophecy. Anticipation would become recollection. The traveler would not just rewrite history, they would dissolve the very framework that lets them understand what history is. Causality shatters not when physics fails, but when the observer steps outside the order that defines observation itself. Imagine freezing the universe, not in stillness, but in totality. Every event that has ever happened and will ever happen exists simultaneously, arranged within a four-dimensional structure called space-time. This is the block universe, the view implied by Einstein's relativity. In this model, the past, present, and future are not separate realms but neighboring regions of one static landscape. The future already exists as surely as the past. What we call the passage of time is merely the movement of consciousness along a fixed path. In a block universe, the grandfather paradox dissolves. The traveler who goes back is not altering the past. They are visiting a coordinate that was always part of space-time's geometry. Their actions there do not rewrite history. They are history. Every decision, every encounter, Every birth and death already occupies its immutable position in the cosmic map. Paradox cannot occur because no event ever contradicts itself. It simply exists in multiple relational frames. What changes is not reality, but our perception of its unfolding. Physicist Hermann Minkowski once described space-time as a fabric where space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away. Within that fabric, causality is not a chain. It's a pattern. Each cause and effect coexist as points connected by light cones, threads of influence that do not move but are. When viewed from outside time, motion becomes symmetry, and change becomes structure. But the block universe carries an unsettling implication. If every event is already fixed, then choice is an illusion. Free will becomes a phenomenon of limited awareness, a traveler believing they steer, unaware the path was drawn before the journey began. In that frozen architecture, the grandfather paradox was never a contradiction. It was a misunderstanding of perspective. Nothing can be changed because nothing ever truly happens. And yet, if time is a structure and not a river, consciousness itself must be the current that makes that structure seem alive. The paradox doesn't vanish. It migrates inward, into the observer who mistakes the map for motion. At the frontier of modern physics, time begins to vanish. In attempts to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity, the theory of the very small and the very large, equations like the Wheeler-DeWitt equation describe a universe with no external clock at all. The fundamental laws at their deepest level contain no t. Reality, it seems, does not evolve in time. Time emerges from the relations between things. The cosmos doesn't tick forward. It simply is. In this timeless framework, the grandfather paradox collapses under its own assumptions. You cannot go back to the past if the past is not a location, but a relationship within a static whole. The traveler's desire to alter history assumes time is a linear corridor that can be traversed. Quantum gravity suggests it's closer to a woven network of states, where cause and effect are not ordered but entangled. Each configuration of the universe, from the birth of galaxies to the firing of a neuron, coexists as one frame within an overarching quantum geometry. The arrow of time and the logic of causality arise only when an observer interacts with part of that network, slicing the whole into a sequence of experiences. In that sense, paradoxes are not violations of physics but artifacts of perspective. The contradiction exists only when we impose a human narrative, when we imagine motion through a dimension that may not fundamentally flow. Just as a film strip contains every frame of a story, the universe may contain every possible moment, timeless and complete. The illusion of causality emerges when consciousness watches those frames one by one and mistakes sequence for creation. If time is emergent, then to travel through it is to shift one's point of reference within a pattern that is already complete. The traveler doesn't change the past. They reoccupy a different configuration of the same eternal structure. The paradox dies not by resolution, but by revelation. It never existed outside our need to experience sequence. If time does not exist fundamentally, what constructs it? Increasingly, physics points to a trinity of principles: information, gravity, and entanglement. Each, on its own, describes a different layer of the universe. Together, they may be the scaffolding from which time itself emerges. Quantum entanglement links particles so that the state of one instantly defines the state of another, no matter the distance. These correlations don't transmit signals through time. They generate the structure of space-time itself. The geometry of the universe, some theorists suggest, arises from the web of entanglement connecting quantum information across the cosmos. In this view, gravity is not a force pulling matter together. It's the curvature produced by how information is shared. Where entanglement is strong, space is near. Where it's weak, space stretches. Time, then, is the rhythm of this connectivity, the way information updates when one part of the network interacts with another. If that's true, then causality isn't a fundamental rule. It's the illusion of coherence inside an informational flow. Each moment is a stable configuration of relationships, and what we call the future is simply the next self-consistent update of the system. From within, it feels like movement. From outside, it's computation. The arrow of time may be nothing more than the direction in which information spreads, from simplicity to complexity, from unity to differentiation. The grandfather paradox becomes absurd in this picture, because the you who travels through time and the you who causes the past are not separate nodes. They are parts of a single informational structure. No causality is broken, no loop exists to resolve. The paradox appears only when consciousness insists on dividing what reality keeps whole. Entanglement weaves existence into coherence, gravity shapes that coherence into geometry, and information animates it as time. We live inside that synthesis, bound to experience cause and effect, not because they're absolute, but because they're the grammar of the only language reality allows us to speak. At the summit of every theory, relativity's curved geometry, quantum mechanics indeterminacy, entropy's arrow, and consciousness sequencing, a single realization emerges. Paradox is not a flaw in our understanding of reality. It is the structure that makes understanding possible. Each attempt to remove contradiction only reveals a deeper symmetry hiding beneath it. Relativity showed that time is not absolute. The order of events depends on perspective. Quantum mechanics revealed that outcomes are not determined until observed. Thermodynamics taught that disorder always grows, yet the very concept of growth implies memory and direction. And consciousness knits these fragments together, turning timeless patterns into the lived experience of succession. Each layer bends causality until it nearly breaks, and yet, without that tension, reality would be static, unreadable, inert. The grandfather paradox stands as the perfect mirror of this truth. Its impossibility protects coherence, but its existence reveals meaning. It tells us that a self-contradictory act, an effect creating its own cause, is what the universe perpetually performs. Stars forge the elements that later form the stars. Observers collapse probabilities that make observers possible. Space-time curves under energy that it itself defines. The cosmos is not linear, it's reflexive. Every cause is also an effect in disguise. Perhaps the reason time travel fascinates us is that it exposes the recursive nature of being. We sense, dimly, that the loop we fear already contains us. Memory reaches backward, prediction reaches forward, and both are acts of creation. The self, like the traveler, is the paradox made flesh, the observer who exists only by observing. In this integration, causality does not collapse, it transcends sequence. The universe maintains consistency by perpetually contradicting itself, balancing on the edge between determinism and freedom. The grandfather paradox, in the end, is not a mistake in logic. It's the blueprint of existence, an endless conversation between what causes and what becomes. The grandfather paradox began as a warning, a logical impossibility, a barrier that time travel could never cross. But now, it feels less like a wall and more like a mirror. Every attempt to solve it has led us deeper into the structure of reality itself, until the paradox stops being a problem and becomes the pattern holding everything together. Time travel destroys causality only if time and cause are real in the way we imagine. Yet the evidence whispers otherwise. Time is not a current that carries us forward, but a landscape we traverse through perception. Causality is not an unbroken chain, but a language the universe speaks to itself through us. A story told in sequence because meaning demands order. Remove the storyteller, and the sequence dissolves. The paradox remains because it is not about killing a grandfather. It's about realizing that the traveler and the ancestor were never separate. They are two moments of one being, two nodes in one timeless equation. To confront the grandfather paradox is to face the recursion at the heart of existence, the effect that gives birth to its cause, the observer who exists only by observing, the cosmos that becomes aware of itself by questioning its own coherence. Time's greatest contradiction is not that it can loop, it's that it must, to make consciousness possible. Without paradox, reality could not sustain awareness. Without self-reference, there could be no now. So perhaps the traveler does pull the trigger, and in doing so, awakens into the realization that the bullet was never meant to travel backward, but inward. The paradox doesn't end time. It reveals what time truly is, the universe watching itself remember. Write in the comments, I still exist in the version that observes.